Hey guys, tonight we step into the warm, flickering glow of a Victorian bedroom. The lamps are gaslit, the wallpaper is floral, and the furniture is almost aggressively wooden. Outside, the fog curls softly along cobblestone alleys, while inside, you, the proud owner of a restless 19th century mind, are trying, once again, to get some sleep. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this night without at least 3 doses of something mildly narcotic and a prayer to Saint Drowsius. Not a real saint, but probably should be. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, post your location and what time it is right now. I love knowing where and when you all are tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie on your back, staring at the intricate plaster ceiling. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and old lavender. You're wearing a nightshirt that reaches your ankles and a woolen cap that never quite stays on. The brass bed creaks with the slightest movement, and your mattress, stuffed with horsehair, naturally, feels like it's both too stiff and too soft at once. You've already tried the popular advice from your physician: no laughter after 8 p.m., no reading anything excitable like Greek plays, and absolutely no consumption of pickled herring after dinner. You broke that one. You regret it deeply. Victorians weren't exactly sure why people couldn't sleep. They blamed nervous energy, full moons, and, in one prominent pamphlet, the proximity of pineapples. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in superstition or a proto-scientific attempt at understanding circadian rhythms. Either way, the pineapple is innocent. The bedroom is chilly. Coal is expensive, after all. You pull the blankets higher, only to inhale a faint aroma of camphor and mothballs. Your grandmother swears by camphor, claiming it wards off night demons and unwanted suitors. She might be confusing her tonics again. The mantel clock ticks steadily, but each tick is like a tiny hammer tapping directly on your brain. You consider covering it with your handkerchief, but you tried that last night and accidentally set fire to your dressing gown. Victorian fire safety was optimistic. Still, this bedroom is your fortress. The windows are triple draped with velvet, lace, and something called sleep blinds. These are exactly what they sound like. Thick panels designed to trick your body into thinking it's midnight even at noon. The only drawback: they trap every odor imaginable. And in a world before deodorant, that's a gamble. On your nightstand, beside a porcelain chamber pot and an illustrated guide to correct posture whilst reclining, lies a slim vial of chlorodyne, a magical elixir made from opium, chloroform, and treacle. It is, in fact, deeply illegal today. But back then, it was the go-to solution for coughs, colic, and yes, even the occasional bout of acute sleeplessness. You uncork it, give it a sniff, and decide you're not quite desperate enough. Yet. Your bed frame, carved with cherubs and swirls, squeaks as you shift. Somewhere beneath the mattress, a hidden spring pokes your ribs. You wonder if this is why your cousin Eliza abandoned her marriage and ran away to study beekeeping in Devon. Maybe insomnia is hereditary, or maybe her husband just snored like a foghorn. The Victorians loved rules, especially bedtime rules. Children were put to bed with strict rituals, brushing teeth with chalk paste, reciting memorized moral proverbs, and making sure they slept on their backs to avoid unwholesome dreaming. Adults followed suit, with spiritual meditations, lavender sachets, and if you were a certain type of bachelor, a habit of sleeping upright in an armchair lest your cravat wrinkle. Historians still debate whether these rituals were genuinely helpful or simply elaborate distractions from the broader anxiety of being alive during the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines were loud, urban life was grimy, and every newspaper reported something about miasmas, spiritual unrest, or trousers catching fire. As your breathing slows, you realize the mattress beneath you is heating up. Not electronically, of course, but thanks to a brass bed warming pan, recently retrieved from the fireplace. It's comforting for about 5 minutes, until you start to feel like a Cornish pasty left too long in the oven. You kick off one blanket, then another, and finally settle into the exact position that will allow you to fall asleep, diagonally, with your left foot sticking out. But the street lamp outside flickers again, and a carriage rumbles past. You hear the clop of horses, the rattle of wheels, and the distant voice of a newsboy yelling about a missing goose. You sigh. Insomnia, it seems, is timeless. And tonight, we'll try every single Victorian remedy available, except maybe the one involving leeches. That one's for emergencies.
The clock is still ticking. The soft tick-tick-tick now feels less like a gentle metronome and more like a tiny judgmental metronome, measuring your failure to drift off. You roll onto your side, only to be greeted by the equally judgmental gaze of a porcelain doll perched on your dresser. Her eyes don't move, but somehow they still seem to follow you. Victorians, it turns out, were obsessed with time. They were so obsessed that the mechanical clock industry exploded during the 19th century, and nearly every middle-class household owned at least one. Some households owned several: bedroom clocks, hallway clocks, pocket watches, even special tea timing timers. It was as though sleep itself needed to be scheduled, charted, and judged by brass hands and gentle chimes. And yet those very clocks were also blamed for keeping people awake. You see, unlike modern quartz timepieces, Victorian clocks didn't glide silently. No, they ticked. Loudly, mechanically, relentlessly. Especially the pendulum clocks, which required regular winding and adjustment, and sometimes came with built-in bells or birds that insisted on chirping every 15 minutes. So, what did the sleepless Victorians do about it? Some covered their clocks in heavy cloth to muffle the sound, an act not unlike trying to smother a marching band with a pillow. Others attempted to sleep in rooms without clocks at all, but this came with its own anxiety. How would they know when it was a proper hour to rise? After all, a person who oversleeps might as well admit to being morally weak. Historians still argue whether the obsession with clocks reflected genuine concern about health or simply a deeper cultural anxiety about time slipping away during an era of dizzying industrial progress. In either case, you, poor sleepless soul, are stuck in a world where rest is expected to be as punctual as a train timetable. You try turning your clock to face the wall. It ticks on, unrepentant. You sigh and reach for your newest acquisition, a noiseless timepiece recommended in the latest issue of the Gentleman's Bedside Companion. This clock claims to use silk gears and soft fall escapements, promising a lullaby for the mechanically inclined. It was also, unfortunately, wildly expensive and not particularly silent. It whirs now, like a tiny mechanical ghost brushing its teeth. Still awake, you run your fingers along the coverlet, embroidered with tiny roses and what you think might be a misquoted Bible verse. Every household in your neighborhood has at least one decorative piece meant to soothe the troubled sleeper. Some have tapestries that depict pastoral sheep. Others favor embroidered samplers with maxims like early to bed, early to rise, avoid all vice after pies. The irony is that many Victorian beds were designed for something other than sleeping. Some were made shorter, not because people were shorter, but because sleeping upright was believed to aid digestion and protect against nighttime apoplexy. This meant lying down flat was seen as potentially risky, like challenging the reaper to a thumb war. Even worse were the fashionable half-tester beds, elaborate structures with partial canopies and heavy curtains designed to trap warmth but also, unfortunately, trap carbon dioxide. People wondered why they woke up groggy after 8 hours in an airless velvet coffin. You're starting to wonder too. One of your neighbors, Mr. Hargraves, the tailor, swears he solved his insomnia by removing all timepieces from his bedroom and replacing them with a single potted fern. She doesn't tick, he explained proudly. She just breathes. You're skeptical of this fern-based philosophy, but it's not the worst idea you've heard. Worse ideas include sleeping with one's feet in cold water, sprinkling cayenne pepper under the mattress, or setting an egg to boil beside your bed and eating it the moment you awaken. That last one sounds like the fever dream of a very confused chicken. You glance again at the clock. It has somehow become louder. Is it ticking more aggressively now? I swear the second hand just rolled its eyes at you. In desperation, you bury it beneath a folded woolen blanket and whisper a stern warning about being replaced by a sundial. For a moment, it works. The room falls into something like silence. You can hear the soft hiss of the gas lamps outside and the distant hoot of an owl who, unlike you, has clearly mastered the art of night living. And just as your eyelids begin to droop, the downstairs grandfather clock strikes 3, with gusto. A full chime, followed by a long echoing bong that might as well be announcing your failure to the entire neighborhood. You sit up. Maybe it's time to consider more drastic measures. Maybe tomorrow you'll visit the curiosity shop on Fleet Street, the one rumored to sell somnambulant pendulums and musical snuff boxes. Or maybe you'll try the French trick, a clock that doesn't tick at all because it's broken and the owner insists broken things have better vibes. You lie back again, exhaling slowly. The night stretches on, timeless and ticking.
You rise the next morning, or more accurately, you surrender to the concept of being upright again. The sun peers through the heavy drapes like a nosy neighbor, diffused through 3 layers of embroidered pessimism. You haven't truly slept, but in true Victorian fashion, you decide to treat that as a moral victory. After all, who needs rest when you have fortitude? The kitchen is already bustling, and by bustling, we mean someone has dropped a coal scuttle and muttered about jam. You shuffle into your slippers, grab your dressing gown, still smelling faintly of smoke from the great handkerchief clock incident, and reach for your favorite ceramic mug, the one painted with a goose in military uniform. It's time for the first remedy of the day. Welcome to the era of insomnia tonics. Milk is your base, always milk. Warmed gently over a fire, not boiled, lest it turn into a culinary war crime. To this, you might add a pinch of nutmeg, a spoonful of honey, or, if you're feeling particularly rebellious, a dash of brandy. But that's for amateurs. You, dear insomniac, have access to a real Victorian miracle, Godfrey's Cordial. Godfrey's Cordial, like many insomnia cures of the day, was a mix of opium, alcohol, treacle, and a prayer. Marketed as safe for infants, it was both highly effective and incredibly dangerous. Adults took it in modest doses, children in terrifyingly casual spoonfuls. It would knock you out, yes, but in a way that felt like being gently buried by a floral-scented avalanche. You sniff the bottle's cork. The label says it cures colic, indigestion, melancholy, sleeplessness, and the nervous trembles. You're not sure what the nervous trembles are, but they sound like something you might catch from reading Wuthering Heights without footnotes. Historians still argue whether these tonics were knowingly recreational, or if the Victorians genuinely believed treacle could cancel out the opium. Many recipes were family secrets, passed down through generations, like pie crusts or passive-aggressive Christmas letters. For the temperance-minded, there were milder brews: chamomile tea, barley water, or the ever-popular posset, a curdled mixture of milk, ale, and spices. It was said to warm the bones and soothe the mind. It was also said to taste like spiced regret. You remember your Aunt Millicent swearing by warm port with a floating clove. She'd sip it by the fireplace and declare herself ready to dream of hedgehogs in bonnets. But Aunt Millicent also believed onions warded off burglars, so her credibility remains under scholarly review. A popular recipe from The Household Physician, 1892 edition, recommends mixing lettuce juice, sugar, and laudanum, served lukewarm in a porcelain cup. Supposedly, lettuce had sedative properties. Supposedly. I once tried lettuce tea. It tasted like soggy lawn and betrayal. You settle for a simple cup of warm milk with nutmeg and a tiny drop of something unnamed and questionably legal. As the heat settles in your belly, you stretch your limbs and wonder if the Victorians ever stopped experimenting with their beverages. The answer is no. They made everything into a drink: turpentine, rhubarb root, even crushed pearls if you were feeling decadent and mildly poisoned. You sip, stare at the fireplace, and think about how many of these potions were sold over the counter at apothecaries who also stocked licorice for children and embalming powder for grandmothers. The duality of man. But perhaps the most curious thing about Victorian night beverages wasn't their ingredients, it was the ceremony. You weren't just meant to drink, you were to prepare. Warm the cup. Fold the cloth napkin just so. Place a fresh sprig of mint nearby, not to consume, but to bless the air. The act itself became a prelude to rest, a ritual, a lullaby in liquid form. You remember your grandfather's rule: 3 sips, 3 thoughts, 1 for today, 1 for tomorrow, 1 for sleep. It made no scientific sense, but then again, neither did putting opium in your tea. Your drink finishes with a gentle swirl of spice. You lean back in your chair, letting the warmth trickle through you. Outside, a baker yells about buns. Somewhere, a dog howls at a cloud. You close your eyes and, for just a moment, you imagine you've drifted off. But your neighbor's rooster disagrees loudly. You make a note. Double the nutmeg next time. Maybe add a whisper of port. Maybe don't read about Queen Victoria's dental hygiene habits right before bed. The night ahead will need stronger medicine.
The bed beckons once more, though not with any particular affection. It's more of a passive-aggressive beckoning.
like a friend who offers you a ride, but reminds you how far out of their way it is. You approach your sleeping quarters as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the chamber, and you remember, tonight you're supposed to try a new method: optimizing your furniture. Yes, in the grand Victorian quest to outwit sleeplessness, furniture wasn't just decor. It was strategy. Bed design, room layout, even the placement of the chamber pot, all of it apparently mattered. You glance at your four-poster bed, a hulking mahogany beast crowned with thick curtains and carved cherubs that look vaguely disappointed in you. The mattress, if it can be called that, is a layered affair. Horsehair, wool, and something described in the receipt as tufted resilience. You suspect that might have been code for lumpy discomfort. Victorian bed frames were often so high that one needed a footstool to climb into them. This was seen as elegant and dignified, though it also led to more than a few midnight injuries involving slippers, startled cats, and gravity. You mount yours like a gentle siege, settling into the center with the caution of a cat burglar in a teacup shop. Historians still debate whether this emphasis on elevated beds was rooted in health concerns, escaping drafts, social vanity, demonstrating wealth, or the simple desire to feel superior to the mice. But it wasn't just the bed. Let's not forget the bed board, a plank placed beneath the mattress to keep it firm. Nothing fosters moral clarity like a hard surface, said a pamphlet from 1863, which may explain why so many Victorians wrote stern letters. Then there's the bolster pillow, a log-like cushion meant to support your back, knees, or occasionally your dignity. Yours feels like someone overstuffed a sausage with regrets and feathers. And yet you follow the protocol. You smooth the coverlet, plump the pillows, and carefully align the sheets. Scratchy. You open the curtains on the bed frame to let in cleansing air, though that air currently smells like roasted onions and someone shouting about buttons in the street. You lie back. But wait, have you chosen the correct sleep orientation? According to Victorian logic, the direction you slept in could affect everything from your dreams to your digestion. North-facing was best, allegedly aligning your internal magnetism with the earth. East-facing, however, was for the spiritually inclined, believed to invite visions and divine messages. South was frowned upon, too French, apparently. You try not to think about that. Your feet, tucked beneath a patchwork quilt passed down from your great-aunt Wilhelmina, the one who married a lighthouse keeper and swore she could smell fog, begin to itch, likely from the quilt's unique combination of flannel, wool, and mystery fibers. You shift. The bed creaks like a dying accordion. Somewhere in the wall, something small and furry expresses disapproval. Of course, not all Victorian beds were created equal. Servants often slept on straw pallets, children on cots, and the truly unfortunate, like your cousin Mortimer, who insisted on sleeping on a hammock for circulation, often fell victim to their own inventions. Mortimer once awoke hanging upside down in a wardrobe. He called it invigorating. He also talked to Pickles, so the jury's out. And let's not forget the grandest bedroom furniture scandal of 1874, the Great Brass Knob Recall. Turns out a popular line of decorative bedposts contained trace amounts of mercury, leading to what one newspaper called sleep-induced lunacy in 4 counties. Sales briefly plummeted, and the phrase, "as mad as a knob turner," was born. But the Victorians never lacked creativity.
If the bed itself failed, there were alternatives. Some installed tilting pillows to elevate the head and prevent brain congestion. Others swore by hammock cradles hung inside wooden frames. Gentle rocking encouraged rest, though pets and small children saw it more as a jungle gym. You roll over to your left side. The pillow resists. You roll over to your right. A spring protests. Eventually you settle flat on your back, arms at your sides like a Victorian corpse, an actual recommended position in several etiquette manuals. Still awake. You reach for the headboard shelf where a slim book rests, the correct position for honorable rest. The diagram on page 3 depicts a figure lying like a mummy, surrounded by symmetrical doilies and moral fortitude. You try to mimic it. Your neck rebels. Across the room, your washstand gleams, a reminder that even Victorian nighttime hygiene was ritualized. A proper sleeper washed face, feet, and hands before bed, then brushed hair exactly 100 strokes, 50 clockwise, 50 counterclockwise, to distribute the natural oils. You skipped that tonight. Your hair remains rebellious, as does your digestion. Your stomach growls. You wonder if it's the nutmeg milk or if your bed has finally become sentient and is growling back. Either way, you accept that Victorian furniture, however gorgeously Gothic, is not the key to sleep. Still, it's part of the story. A creaky, ornate, overbuilt part. And maybe, just maybe, the familiarity of those creaks and squeaks will lull you into rest. If not, there's always the hammock idea, or Mortimer's pickle lullaby.
You're back in bed. Again. It's your third attempt tonight, and you're beginning to suspect the bed knows it. It has developed a smugness, a creaky, stuffed confidence that only inanimate furniture with centuries of discomfort experience can achieve. But tonight, you've got backup. Or rather, someone does. Dr. Wadsworth, country physician and enthusiastic dispenser of peculiar advice. He's well known in Sussex for his bedside manner, his unorthodox remedies, and for once prescribing pickled parsnip juice to a man who couldn't stop dreaming about barn owls. Victorian doctors like Wadsworth were a curious blend of science, superstition, and sheer optimism. Insomnia wasn't seen as just a nuisance. It was a potential symptom of deeper imbalances, spiritual unrest, digestive misalignment, or simply too much brain heat. You'd think someone would have suggested taking off the 3 woolen layers before bed, but no. Clearly, the problem was your gallbladder's attitude. Dr. Wadsworth makes his rounds each evening through the sleepy lanes of Sussex, visiting households lit by candle and complaint. He carries a black leather bag filled with tinctures, powders, and something that smells faintly of licorice and betrayal. His motto? If you can't sleep, confuse the body into doing it anyway. Tonight, he visits Mrs. Pepperby first, a widow known for snoring like a distressed goose. Her remedy? Boiled lettuce water, sipped slowly while humming the doxology. She claims it gives her calmness in the liver. Historians still argue whether lettuce has any real sedative qualities, or if Mrs. Pepperby simply bored herself unconscious. Next stop, the Ferguson twins, aged 73 and 75, who insist that dreams are being stolen by the neighbor's cat. Dr. Wadsworth gives them each a thimble of brandy and tells them to sprinkle salt in their slippers. It does nothing, but the act of doing it convinces them it's working, which, to be fair, is half the battle. You, having heard of Wadsworth's curious ways, tried his method last week. Lie on a hard floor with your feet elevated and whisper your worries into a handkerchief before burning it. You accidentally set the rug on fire and gave yourself a crick in the neck. The sleep, when it finally came, was mostly from smoke exhaustion. Still, the man gets results, at least according to his testimonials. One particularly glowing review from a retired chimney sweep claims Wadsworth's powdered root mix allowed him to dream in full sentences for the first time since 1843. Tonight, Wadsworth tries something new. He pulls out a small sachet, linen tied with green ribbon, and instructs the patient to tuck it under their pillow. Contains valerian root, crushed rose petals, and just a kiss of newtfoot, he says cheerfully. Whether or not that last ingredient is real remains uncertain. You suspect it's code for mint. The idea of pillow sachets isn't unique to Sussex. Across the country, Victorians favored scented objects near the bed to calm the senses. Lavender was most popular, followed by chamomile, then less obvious choices like marjoram, hops, or, for the daring, myrrh. You once tried a sachet filled with dried fennel. It smelled like pickled soap. The dreams were confusing. Dr. Wadsworth also recommends repositioning the bed itself. You've got to face the window but not the street. Natural moonlight, but no coach clatter. He pauses. Unless the clatter reminds you of pleasant things. You ask what kind of pleasant things clatter reminds people of. He tells you he once had a patient who fell asleep best during thunder. That man now lives under a tin roof in Cornwall and sleeps like a contented log. Historians continue to debate whether itinerant doctors like Wadsworth were effective healers or charming distractions. Certainly, many of their remedies had placebo value, if not medical efficacy. But in an age when insomnia was treated more like a character flaw than a condition, any dose of empathy, even powdered, was worth its weight in crushed nutmeg. After his final visit, a school teacher who believes chalk dust is haunting his dreams retires to his own modest home, eats half a turnip, and falls asleep in a chair. No special teas, no chants, just pure exhaustion. You envy him deeply. You lie back again, clutching your own sachet. It smells faintly of hay and optimism. You whisper your grievances to the ceiling, then try imagining Mrs. Pepperby's goose snore as ocean waves. It's oddly effective. Maybe Wadsworth is on to something after all.
You stare at the ceiling again, your thoughts fluttering somewhere between existential fatigue and an urgent desire to punch the moon. Clearly, nothing conventional is working. Maybe it's time to try something a little more British. Counting sheep? Everyone's heard of it. It's practically synonymous with sleep. But in 19th century Britain, especially among the quirkier countryside gentry, a rather odd replacement emerged, counting garden gnomes. Yes, gnomes. They weren't quite the cheerful lawn ornaments we know today. Early Victorian gnomes were squat, suspicious creatures with exaggerated beards, furrowed brows, and a permanent look of disapproval, as if they'd just caught you trimming your hedges incorrectly. They arrived from Germany, part of a broader decorative gardening trend that included topiary lions, faux ruins, and something called a toadstone pedestal. The trend caught on, particularly with upper-middle-class households eager to showcase their sophistication and mild eccentricity. And when one especially insomniac noblewoman from Wiltshire, a certain Lady Winifred C. Gubbins, reported that imagining rows of gnomes marching across her garden helped lull her to sleep, the idea spread like slightly mouldy marmalade. Historians still argue whether this gnome-counting fad was sincerely practiced or just an upper-class in-joke. But letters from the era show multiple mentions of gnome routines, midnight patrols, and even the Great Gnome Reckoning, an elaborate bedtime ritual performed during a particularly sleepless summer in 1872. You give it a try. One gnome. He's holding a rake, glaring at you like you've walked mud onto his petunias. Two gnomes, twins perhaps, standing beside a bird bath, deeply unimpressed with your lack of sleepwear coordination. Three gnomes. One wears a monocle. His name is probably Bartholomew. You don't know why you know that, but you do. This is absurd, but also oddly calming. The key, apparently, is visualizing them not just standing still, but going about their beauties. Victorian sleepers imagined their gnomes trimming hedges, pulling weeds, inspecting root vegetables, and occasionally holding suspicious meetings behind the gazebo. Some claimed the routine worked best if you imagined assigning the gnomes specific tasks. Weed this bed, sweep that path, fluff the foxgloves. The more mundane, the better. Supposedly, this triggered what physicians delicately referred to as mental vacancy, a state somewhere between meditation and mild brain fog. You now have 6 gnomes. One is adjusting a very small sundial. 7. He's just sighing loudly. 8. You name him Reginald and assign him to organize the others. As your imaginary workforce grows, something shifts. Your breath slows. The room softens around the edges. The blanket feels just a little heavier, in the good way, like being gently pressed by warm bread dough. Still, gnome counting wasn't for everyone. Some critics found the creatures unsettling. A letter to the London Home and Hearth Gazette warns, "The overactive imagination may corrupt the wholesome gnome with visions of malice. I once dreamt of a gnome rebellion, woke to find my boots rearranged." The author goes unnamed. To address such concerns, alternative visualization practices were proposed. One involved mentally walking a spiral staircase while reciting Roman emperors backwards. Another encouraged imagining a quiet lake being raked for leaves by invisible monks. You tried that one last week, got distracted wondering how monks learned to rake invisible things. You return to your gnomes. Number 12 is installing a miniature fence. You praise his work ethic. Number 13 appears to be knitting. You don't question it. Your limbs grow heavier, your eyes fluttering closed, open only when the wind shifts outside and rattles the shutters gently. You're not asleep, not yet, but your mind is occupied just enough, busy with quiet, ridiculous images. Gnomes with names and tiny shovels, some whispering, some humming old nursery tunes. You realize distantly that counting sheep might just have been too pastoral for the industrial Victorian world. Gnomes, tiny, industrious, oddly irritable, felt more appropriate. They were the nocturnal union workers of the sleep-deprived subconscious. 14. 15. One begins sweeping something imaginary off your windowsill. You smile. Maybe tonight the gnomes will stand guard until morning.
The night air thickens with the scent of damp stone and distant coal smoke. You toss once more, surrendering to gravity and the unyielding lump in the mattress you now suspect is a rogue button or the ghost of poor lumbar support. Either way, the battle for sleep continues. Tonight, it's the featherbed's turn to face the Inquisition. Ah, the feather bed. Glorious in theory, soft, warm, luxurious, practically a status symbol in Victorian Britain. It said, "I am comfortable, I am cultured, and I am willing to sleep atop a dense cloud of plucked poultry." But in reality, it was often a sneeze-inducing, back-twisting, overheating nightmare. You shift again, trying to find the one mythical position where your spine isn't protesting and your nose isn't staging a rebellion. The feathers, collected from geese, ducks, or whatever winged creature had the misfortune of being nearby, tend to clump over time, and unlike modern materials, they don't distribute evenly. It's more hill and valley than gentle cushion. Historians still debate whether the featherbed's popularity came from comfort, cultural prestige, or sheer inertia. Once you invested in one, you simply pretended it was working, like early treadmills or polite marriages. Your own feather mattress, inherited from your Uncle Percival, emits a gentle pff every time you move. It's not a sound you'd expect from bedding, more like a goose sighing in disappointment. You're beginning to wonder if the mattress is haunted. The real villain, though, is the dust. Feathers were notoriously tricky to clean, and they tended to trap all manner of unpleasantness, mites, pollen, and the kind of invisible filth that would make a modern allergist break into hives just thinking about it. You once read an article claiming that the average Victorian featherbed held enough allergens to incapacitate a small choir. To combat this, households beat the mattresses regularly, literally dragging them outside and whacking them with rug beaters. Entire afternoons were dedicated to this pursuit. Some families made a game of it. Whoever knocked the most dust out earned the first turn warming their feet by the fire. Your great-aunt used to say, "If the featherbed doesn't sneeze back at you, it isn't seasoned properly." She died from wool inhalation. I suspect a pattern. Still, for all their quirks, featherbeds were preferred over straw mattresses, which crackled like dry leaves and attracted mice with an alarming regularity. One cousin of yours had a mattress that rustled every time he exhaled. His nickname became Haystack. He leaned into it. You attempt to fluff your pillow, a feat easier said than done when it resists like overfilled pastry. There's a brief moment where you think you've achieved equilibrium. Your head sinks in, the corners puff gently round your ears, and the bed is suddenly a bit less like a judgmental bird and more like a tired marshmallow. Until, of course, the tickling begins. It starts with a whisper of a feather shaft working its way through the fabric, a gentle poke, then another. You swat at it. It retreats, then returns stronger, as though offended. You consider reinforcing the pillowcase with an extra layer of flannel, or, more radically, just accepting your fate and sleeping with a bonnet tied under your chin like a deeply exhausted milkmaid. Still, awake, you think about the feather debates in polite society. Some claimed goose feathers were best, others swore by duck, and a few radical types even suggested pheasant. The Household Almanac of 1859 devotes a full page to feather stratification and moral slumber, arguing that the way your feathers were layered
affected both your dreams and your digestion. You have no idea what your mattress is layered with, but it might be vengeance. You remember visiting your cousin Esme, who had a down bed so overstuffed she appeared to sink completely into it. I once spent the night there, only to wake up sweating profusely, unable to roll over, trapped in what felt like a pillow-based avalanche. It was like sleeping inside a croissant. On the other end of the spectrum were the utilitarian types who opted for horsehair mattresses, the anti-feather. Rigid, firm, unyielding. Often accompanied by the slogan, "Sleep like you mean it." But even those had their flaws, namely, the terrifying creak they made when you moved. Sounded like someone reading a love letter to a dying violin. You fluff your own bedding once more and tuck a corner of the sheet under your chin, Victorian style. It's a bit theatrical, but there's something about the weight of the blanket and the smell of lavender, faint but hanging in there, that calms the nerves. At least until a loose feather pokes you in the ear. One day, you tell yourself, they'll invent something better, something breathable, balanced, made of springs, perhaps, or, dare to dream, memory foam that doesn't require a team of butlers and a crowbar to rotate. But tonight, you settle back into the feathery chaos, sneeze gently once, and pretend the tickling sensation is simply a very small, very well-meaning ghost trying to tuck you in.
The gnomes are off duty. The feathers have declared war, and the clock, still ticking, now with an extra wheeze like it's developed asthma from sheer spite. You lie there bleary-eyed and remember tonight's other grand experiment, the gender-specific sleep cure. Because, in true Victorian fashion, men and women weren't just separated by corsets and cravats, they were divided even in their dreams, or at least in how doctors thought they ought to dream. You rise from bed and fumble your way to the reading nook, where your collection of medical oddities includes a slim, scandalously dog-eared book, Rest for the Weary, A Gentleman's Guide to Evening Composure. It begins with a dramatic assertion: a man's sleep is a fortress, a woman's a fragile bower. Charming. Victorian men, the book insists, suffer insomnia due to overwork, ambition, and pressures of the rational mind. The cure? Brandy, late walks with a firm cane, or heated discussions about colonial trade policies before bed. Gentlemen were also encouraged to avoid books of poetry and undue softness of pillow. Historians still argue whether these cures were meant to reinforce masculinity or simply offer excuses for more brandy. Either way, it's clear that for men, insomnia was a battle of the will, a foe to outmaneuver with discipline and the occasional steaming mug of beef broth. Women, on the other hand, were diagnosed with something called nervous exhaustion. The recommended cures ranged from lavender-scented handkerchiefs and warm milk to, brace yourself, mild electroshock therapy. Yes, a gentle buzz to the temple delivered via a hand-cranked device that looked suspiciously like a pastry whisk with ambition. The idea was that women's minds were simply too sensitive, too florid with emotion, and thus required soothing through passive means, reading scripture, sewing by candlelight, or lying motionless beneath layers of flannel while someone played the harp nearby. No, really, the harp as tranquilizer was an actual pamphlet. You recall your cousin Adeline, who once claimed to have been cured of a month-long sleep drought by being read aloud to from the family's mouldy cookbook.
She described the rhythmic listing of sponge pudding instructions as intellectually numbing in all the right ways. Men, of course, couldn't possibly benefit from such methods. A man needed structure, regulation. One popular strategy was the 10-minute rule. Only allow yourself 10 minutes in bed before deciding whether sleep is possible. If not, rise immediately, walk briskly around the drawing room, eat a hard biscuit, and return to bed like nothing happened. You've tried this. You mostly just ate 4 biscuits and stubbed your toe on the sideboard. Another male-centric method involved intense journaling, not the soul-bearing kind, but the tallying sort, recording weather patterns, stock prices, or the weights of various root vegetables. One pamphlet encouraged men to sketch their socks in ink before bed. You tried that once. It resulted in a rather abstract rendering of your left foot and an ink stain the size of Norway. Meanwhile, women were urged to air their thoughts without speaking them. In practice, this meant long sighs at windows, clutching embroidered pillows, or writing in diaries so tightly scripted that entire entries looked like ant trails. You've seen your sister's sleep journal. It includes entries like 2:14 a.m. Imagined the lace curtain was breathing. Felt judged. It's worth noting that even the design of bedchambers was gendered. Men's rooms were darker, filled with leather, books, and heavy drapes, while women's rooms leaned toward floral wallpaper, lace, and so many cushions it was a tripping hazard. In each case, the bedroom reflected the accepted bedtime role, conqueror of the night or delicate lily to be gently cradled into slumber. One of the more curious sleep cures reserved for upper-class women was the rest cure, pioneered by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. Women would be confined to bed for weeks, forbidden from reading, writing, or socializing, and fed a high-fat diet while attended by nurses who fluffed pillows and discouraged opinions. It was marketed as a return to true womanhood. Most patients returned with stronger opinions and weaker thigh muscles. You settle back into your own bed, wondering which prescription you'd be given if you wandered into a Victorian clinic: brandy and bookkeeping, or harp and handkerchief. Possibly both. You tuck your blanket higher, adjust your pillow with a stern glance, and whisper one of the most gender-neutral Victorian sleep mantras: "If I must be tired, let me at least be horizontal." A tiny snore escapes. Maybe progress at last.
It's now the hour when even the cats have stopped yowling. The house is quiet, the fire is a faint orange glow, and your gnome brigade has long since fallen asleep on their tiny rakes. You're teetering between drowsy and alert, like a door left just barely ajar when you remember the evening's final and perhaps strangest suggestion: summon your dreams. Victorians, especially those with an appetite for the mystical, believed that sleep was not merely a biological necessity, but a spiritual gateway. And where there's a gateway, there's always someone selling tickets. In this case, mediums, mystics, and the occasional mesmerist who dabbled in sleep by seance. You light a single candle on your nightstand, just as one Lady Hester Doddington prescribed in her 1871 pamphlet, Whispers from the Pillow Vale. The cover features an etching of a dream catcher tangled in moonbeams and something that might be a confused ferret. According to Lady Doddington and her enthusiastic followers, insomnia wasn't about nerves or diet, or the indignity of being poked by feathers.
It was about resistance to the dream realm. One mustn't chase sleep, but invite it, like a guest to tea. And if that guest refused to arrive, then perhaps a séance was in order. Historians still argue whether these practices were sincere spiritual pursuits or elaborate performance art for the upper crust. Either way, they were surprisingly detailed. You were to dim the lights, burn something fragrant, sandalwood or dried fig leaf preferably, and hold a piece of personal significance, a locket, a button, or an onion you'd wept over once in your youth. Then, while lying on your back, you'd chant something along the lines of, "Spirits of rest, come heed my plea, wrap my mind in dusk's decree." There were endless variations. Some rhymed, some didn't. Some involved bells. Others demanded silence and the careful observation of the shadows under the bed, known as dream corridors. You once tried to peer into your dream corridor, saw only lint and what might have been a beetle with aspirations. Still, the candle flickers now, casting soft shadows on the ceiling, and it's not unpleasant. You murmur the lines, not because you believe in spectral sleep guides, but because whispering anything rhythmic in a dim room at 3 a.m. tends to do something to the brain. Victorian spiritualists truly believed dreams were not internal, but delivered, like milk or newspapers. Some even insisted that dreams were messages from the dearly departed, coded metaphors wrapped in surreal packaging. You're not sure what your dream about pawking cabbages trying to sell you insurance meant, but if your Aunt Lillian was behind it, she's lost her touch. More ambitious insomniacs paid for sleep readings, private sessions where a medium would dream on your behalf, then report back with suggestions for your life and bedtime posture. Popular mediums became minor celebrities. One famous gentleman, Sir Edwin Blenkinsop, toured the country offering group dream inductions, wherein guests would sit in a darkened drawing room, hold hands, and try to collectively imagine an old lighthouse until someone passed out. You consider the logistics of group sleeping circles. Imagine asking your neighbors to join you in spiritual repose while someone plays a triangle. You imagine Mr. Hargraves would bring snacks and ruin the mood. Victorian spirit pillows were a niche but growing trend by the 1880s, sewn with silver thread and stuffed with herbs and shredded séance transcripts. They were advertised as etherically attuned. You once tried one at a friend's house. The pillow felt like it had opinions. Others turned to dream elixirs, supposedly blessed by clairvoyance. One such tonic, Nocturne's Embrace, claimed to transport the drinker to a sleep temple in Mesopotamia. In reality, it mostly transported people to their bedpans. It was 80% prune extract and 20% clove. You lie back and stare at the ceiling, which now resembles a lazy constellation. Your eyelids flutter. The shadows drift like soft ink across parchment. Maybe the Victorians were on to something. Not the ghosts, perhaps, but the ritual. The sense that sleep should be honored, coaxed, approached like a slow waltz, rather than wrestled like a bear in a corset. You breathe in the faint scent of old lavender and wax.
The candle has burned low, its wax pooling into a sleepy puddle at the base of the dish. You lie still, your body wrapped in heavy quilts, your thoughts only half your own. If the séance didn't summon your dreams, maybe the next technique will. Victorian noise machines, or at least their hand-cranked, wind-up,
bug-filled ancestors. Yes, long before white noise apps and ocean wave playlists, the sleepless Victorians had to get creative. You remember your aunt's bedtime ritual, placing a hollowed gourd filled with dried peas near the fireplace so it would rattle just slightly as the room warmed. Soothing as rainfall on a conservatory roof, she claimed. You mostly remember the mice. One of the earliest and most widespread noisemakers was the tick beetle. Not a machine, but an insect whose name doubled as both descriptor and audiophile. These beetles made repetitive clicking sounds from within wooden walls, a byproduct of their courtship, or possibly their judgmental nature. Some Victorians found the sound maddening, others strangely comforted. You're somewhere in the middle. A friend once gifted you a jar with a single sleep beetle, promising it would tick gently through the night. It escaped on the first evening and was later found inside a biscuit tin, still ticking. Historians still argue whether beetles were ever deliberately kept for their sounds, or if the Victorians were simply too tired to evict them. But records show at least one manor in Derbyshire advertised its guest rooms as naturally soundscaped with creaking floorboards and seasonal beetle chorus. For those less enthused by bugs, mechanical options emerged, chief among them the lullaby box. These were small wind-up music players, often shaped like birds, flowers, or, inexplicably, cauliflowers, that played soft tunes using a system of pins and combs. I owned one as a child that played a wobbly rendition of Greensleeves with the melancholy of a very tired ghost. The problem was they didn't last long. 45 seconds, maybe a minute, just enough time to drift, only to be jolted back into consciousness as the last note plinked out with sad finality. Some enterprising souls rewound them endlessly throughout the night. Others tried to synchronize multiple boxes in sequence, like a chorus of miniature robots singing you into unconsciousness. Then there were the chiming devices, small mechanisms placed near beds that released a soft bell at intervals. Supposedly, this trained the body to breathe in rhythm, or, more dubiously, to realign its dream cycles with the moon. You're pretty sure that last bit was just poetic marketing. You once tried to build a chiming contraption using a spoon, a string, and the family cat. It worked exactly once at 3:17 a.m., and then the cat left home for a week. A more relaxing option came from nature itself. Victorians living near water often praised the sound of creeks, brooks, or rain on slate roofs. Those in drier cities had to improvise, running water through indoor fountains, setting up devices that dripped at steady intervals, or placing jars beneath eaves during storms to catch and amplify the rhythm. You replicate this now, with a kettle set to release steam through a cracked spout. It hisses softly in the corner, like an elderly librarian reciting lullabies. Surprisingly effective. Other noise curators took things even further. Wind chimes indoors, slowly turning fans powered by pulleys, or even draping musical ribbons across windows to create soft tones as the breeze passed. Your neighbor once installed a wind-activated string of bells that played a rough version of Rule Britannia every time the dog door opened. And, of course, no discussion of Victorian sleep sounds would be complete without the night watchman's rattle, a noisemaker used by security patrollers to announce the hour. It was technically designed to wake people, not lull them, but for some Victorians it became a soothing landmark. 3 in the morning, he's still alive, and so sadly am I. You lie back, soothed slightly by the soft hiss of the kettle. You imagine a ticking beetle wearing a monocle. Somewhere nearby, a wind-up daffodil box plays a lullaby you swear you've never heard, but somehow know by heart. The room is not silent, but it is soundful, filled with gentle noises designed to distract, not disturb. Not perfection, but comfort. And for the sleepless, that's enough. You blink slowly, exhale through your nose, and let the sounds wash over you.
The kettle hisses like a sleepy serpent. Your limbs are warm under layers of flannel, your pillow nest finally accepting the shape of your skull, and you are still awake. Barely, but enough to contemplate the grand, swirling Victorian panic known as the sleep hygiene crisis. Yes, at some point in the 1880s, the upper classes collectively decided that sleeping, simple, blissful, horizontal unconsciousness was in danger. Not from poor diet or ghosts this time, but from bad habits. Suddenly, sleep needed a protocol, a regimen, a tidy list of do's and don'ts longer than a train ticket to Edinburgh. You sit up and reach for the pamphlet that started it all, The Proper Habits of Evening Repose, a Guide to Sleep Morality and Posture. Published in 1883, it was written by Reverend Elijah Moncroft, a man with very strong opinions about bedtime and no apparent sense of humor. Page 1. To sleep with unbrushed hair is to invite the devil's knots. Comforting. Page 3 warns sternly against sleeping in socks, claiming it confuses the body's internal thermometer and leads to immoral dreams. Page 4 included a diagram of how one's toes should point, ideally northeast. Historians still debate whether Moncroft's pamphlet was genuinely influential or simply the bedtime version of a rant written by candlelight after too many cups of weak tea. But influential it was. Overnight, pun regrettably intended, sleep hygiene became a hot topic at parlors, health clubs, and awkward dinner parties. Soon, publications everywhere were peddling ideal bedtime routines. You were to bathe at precisely 8:45 p.m., no hotter than 96 degrees Fahrenheit, using soap with no scent stronger than lemon balm. After bathing, you would dry with a towel warmed, not hot, by the hearth. Don your designated night linen and perform 15 minutes of mild lung expansion exercises, such as standing with your arms outstretched like a weather vane while inhaling through the left nostril only. One pamphlet recommended reciting Latin phrases during this stretch. Somnus benevolentia venit. Sleep comes with kindness. You once tried that and accidentally summoned the neighbor's dog. Dinner, of course, had to be finished no later than 6 p.m. and should consist only of digestible materials: white fish, boiled turnips, and perhaps a roll if you were feeling decadent. Spices were considered reckless. Cheese? Sinful. A slice of cheddar could allegedly undo 3 nights of good rest. You begin to suspect the anti-cheese propaganda was funded by a bitter milkman. You remember vividly one particularly ambitious guidebook that dictated room orientation, color theory, and even bedding thread counts. It encouraged you to repaint your walls a soothing seafoam or dusty rose, forbid the presence of any mirrors for fear of reflecting anxiety, and suggested draping silk scarves over gas lamps to diffuse the moral temperature. Of course, that last bit frequently led to minor house fires, so the 1884 edition included an asterisk. The same era saw a boom in bedroom objects marketed for their hygienic influence. Glass water carafes with lids, ceramic hot water bottles shaped like pigs, ivory toothpick holders that doubled as thermometer stands. You once spent 5 shillings on a slumber gourd, a hollowed-out squash infused with sage and cloves that you were supposed to place near your feet. All it did was confuse the dog. And let's not forget the sudden rise of sleep etiquette coaches. Yes, actual people who toured society homes, inspecting bedrooms for offensive clutter, overly emotional wallpaper, or anything that might excite the optic nerves. One such coach told your cousin Meredith to remove her doily collection from the nightstand. Meredith cried. The coach was later found napping in the linen closet. The irony of it all, of course, is that the more rules Victorians created around sleep, the harder it became to fall asleep. The mental checklist grew longer. Did I stretch? Did I boil the sheets? Did I silence the grandfather clock with emotional validation? You begin to wonder if the true villain of Victorian insomnia was simply anxiety disguised in polite embroidery. And yet, there's a strange comfort in the routine. You sip your cooled milk. You fold your nightshirt just so. You adjust the folds of the curtain so they hang evenly, because somewhere in your brain, Reverend Moncroft is judging you with quiet ecclesiastical dismay. You lie back. Your pillow breathes out a puff of approval. You recite mentally. Dinner, fish, toes northeast, no cheese, no socks, Latin optional. Your eyes close. A breeze nudges the curtain, and the gnome on your nightstand leans forward slightly, probably to inspect your form. You're not asleep, but you are aligned.
Your dreams hover just beyond reach, like a hat caught in a tree, gently swaying but never quite falling. You sink further into the bed, now as familiar and dented as a well-worn teacup, and think of what the Victorians might call a royal dilemma, Her Majesty's troubled sleep. Yes, even Queen Victoria herself, sovereign of a quarter of the globe, wrestled nightly with her bed-sheets. It seems that no one, not even monarchs, are spared the curse of the tossing and turning. Her private letters, scattered through archives like breadcrumbs of sleeplessness, mention everything from restless unease in the bones to a general agitation of the spirit. Historians still argue whether she truly suffered from chronic insomnia or merely had too many things and servants in her room to actually relax. You imagine it now. Buckingham Palace, gaslight flickering, footmen whispering just beyond the door, and Queen Victoria propped against a mountain of lace-trimmed pillows, glaring at the ceiling as if it personally insulted her corgi.
The royal bedroom protocol was no small thing. The monarch's sleep schedule was considered a matter of national interest. If the queen was tired, what hope was there for the postman or the tax clerk? Each evening, at precisely the same time, the royal bed would be inspected, not just for comfort, but for political readiness. Quilts adjusted, slippers fluffed. One poor chambermaid's job was simply to ensure the warming pan was neither too hot nor insufficiently respectful. The bed itself was a grand affair. Thick canopies, embroidered headboards, and a pillow configuration that took 3 footmen and a spreadsheet to understand. Rumor has it that one visiting dignitary mistook the Queen's pillow arrangement for a nesting doll puzzle and removed 5 before finding the actual sleep surface. Queen Victoria's bouts of sleeplessness often followed moments of emotional turmoil. After Prince Albert's death, she reported long nights spent pacing, sometimes wearing full mourning dress well past midnight. Her servants, unsure how to assist, began leaving small comforts in her path. Handkerchiefs soaked in lavender oil, tiny cakes, notes with calming scripture passages. One even left a miniature ivory cat with a painted-on smile. No one admitted to that one. The Queen reportedly refused most pharmaceutical sleep aids, mistrusting powders and continental solutions. Instead, she relied on ritual, a final walk through her private garden at dusk, a reading of Psalm 23, and the presence of a favored dog curled up on a specially sanctioned footstool near the fireplace. The dog's name, for the record, was Dash, a spaniel, with diplomatic immunity. You reflect on this. Perhaps the trick isn't some magic potion, or a beetle, or chanting Latin. Perhaps it's simply consistency. The same rhythm, the same comfort, the same dog snore drifting up from the hearth. One lesser-known fact. Queen Victoria had a fondness for clocks. Yes, those ticking devils, but only if they were French and sounded like the gentle exhalation of polite applause. One such clock, kept on her nightstand, was wound nightly by a man named Arthur, whose only job was quiet maintenance. You imagine Arthur, very serious, winding in slippers, whispering apologies to the gears. And when all else failed, the Queen reportedly turned to her beloved journals, pages upon pages of rambling reflections on statecraft, laundry, and occasionally what she had for supper. One entry reads simply, "Chicken again, mildly seasoned, still no sleep." You glance at your own nightstand. No servants, no footman, no dog with noble bloodlines, just a glass of water, a slightly melted candle, and a paperback with a cracked spine. Not quite regal, but close enough. You shift slightly, arranging your pillow in what you now dub the Windsor stack. You take a deep breath and imagine you're the sovereign of your own tiny kingdom, your blankets the border, your slippers the fleet. Your subjects are quiet tonight. Even the kettle has fallen asleep. You close your eyes and imagine Dash snoring gently at your feet. If the Queen can nod off with the empire on her shoulders, surely you can manage with only a mildly grumpy mattress and a gnome or two on standby.